Hi. So it's me again, and this is sort of like an epilogue where I sit and I don't have anything near as close as an actual, well thought out thesis as what happened with the interlude. I just want to talk about some things and probably fail to really express them with any degree of depth or eloquence. I don't particularly think I have a gift for speech at times. And I think there are probably times during this Let's Play where I probably failed to express the things that I wanted to. But that's me being really hard on myself. If you have made it this far and you have watched through the series, I owe you my absolute deepest gratitude, and I want you to know that you truly have my love and my deepest sentiments. Not a lot of people are going to sit back and find this playlist and watch it, and if you have watched all of it, you deserve nothing but the fullest and warmest regards that I can muster within my heart. You are amazing. You are the reason why I do things like this. Or at least you are one of the reasons I do things like this. I also do things like this because I happen to have an abundance of spare time on my hand and a certain overwhelming love of video games. For the record, we are climbing up the Shrine of Worship and engaging in what is probably one of the best Easter eggs in a game ever. That wonderful sort of miraculous Garden of Eden that we saw Mono and Agro in at the end of the game, it exists, and I feel it's fitting at the end of our journey for us to go there as well. And sort of, in some sort of metaphorical way, join with them. So that's what we're going to do. So I said that there's, you're the reason I do this, or at least one of the reasons why I do this. Well, what's the other reason then? And let's consider that I've done sort of critical things before, or critical videos before, even though they were on sort of simpler text, even though that's not being as kind to the other texts, because I think they're still valuable text, and those texts were Far Cry 4 and Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes. So the question is actually not why I do this, but why I chose this game. Shadow of the Colossus is an incredibly important game, I believe, for the entire medium. Why do I say this? What part of me has the gall to sit back and say that Shadow of the Colossus is incredibly important compared to, say, any other text that we might examine? Well, the answer is that big capital letter word that we talked about in the interlude, and occasionally during times of this series, and that's semiotics. I fear that I've been a generally poor semiotician when it comes to really discussing what semiotics is and explaining how this game is communicating its meaning or the symbols that I'm finding in it. But I think this game is largely important because of how much ambiguity is in it and how much that ambiguity empowers the player to sort of find their own story and find their own myth, and sort of not just find it, but play it and find that meaning and really have it come to life. It's incredibly cliche of me to say, but games are a very special medium. Video games are a very special medium, I should say. Games in general have existed for thousands, if not billions of years. I'm not good with time or history every now and then. Give me a break, gosh darn it. But video games are very important, and Shadow of the Colossus is, I believe, a modern-day myth. And first off, here we go, our own little Garden of Eden. We've certainly earned it, or at least we as players and as people watching this series have earned it. Wander sort of earned a different fate. So back to why Shadow of the Colossus is important. It is a game that not only has phenomenal production value and a very evocative world and very tight and unique gameplay, right? I can say all those things, but those things only mean so much. Those things are the things that make it an enjoyable thing to play. You know, the kinesthetics of the controller. Climbing right there felt pretty good. Fighting a Colossus feels pretty good, even though it can be an awkward, sort of strange experience. That's not what gives Shadow of the Colossus its strength, even though certainly without those things the game would be an absolute pain in the ass. But then again, Deadly Premonition plays like a sack of shit. Deadly Premonition plays like you're trying to toss a sack of doorknobs back and forth between you and your best friend. But still, Deadly Premonition is an amazing game. Shadow of the Colossus doesn't have to worry about feeling like a sack of doorknobs. Shadow of the Colossus is a very polished, wonderful thing, but the thing that gives it strength is the fact that we can imbue so much meaning into the game world and into the story. We've talked about this game, and let's consider the game itself and not the individual parts of the game. Let's consider this game itself a sign, right? And we've talked about how a sign has something it's meant to signify. On a broad level, the thing it's meant to signify is whatever intention that Fumito Ueda has inside of his head when he sat down and said, I'm going to make a prequel to Ico about a sort of clumsy swordsman killing giants. That's sort of the initial message that's being sent to us, but the thing we need to understand with games, and especially with games, is that the message that is sent is not always the message that is received. And Shadow of the Colossus has so much fundamental power, not just because I'm sure that there was a strong fundamental message being sent by Fumito Ueda, but because we can imbue this space with so much meaning of our own just through study of symbols and sort of our own interpretations of them. I can talk about that even right here. We are in a Garden of Eden type place. When I eat this fruit, unlike any other fruit inside of the game, when I eat it, it actually depletes my stamina bar. Other fruit actually increases my stamina bar, or excuse me, lizard tails increase my stamina bar, and fruit increases my health. Here I have a Garden of Eden space, a fruit that I can shoot down, and it does quote-unquote damage to me. All of a sudden, our mind is filled with all sorts of symbols. We think of, obviously, the Garden of Eden, but we think of all sorts of other things, and I can't even think of them right now. Whatever the hell the Greek myth is with the dude who's stuck in the freaking muck of Hades, and he's reaching up to grab the fruit, and he can never reach it. I should know this, but I'm also very tired. It is early in the morning, and I wanted to get this done. So even me being in this space right now, shooting down that fruit and eating it, through the systems of the game, through all of the things that are happening, through the images and stories that are existent within my mind and within my heart, all of a sudden the acts that I do take on a certain powerful meaning. My shooting down that fruit was me taking a forbidden fruit. The game doesn't ever sit back and say, don't go up to the garden, the fruit is forbidden, like it doesn't need to do that, right? The strength of Shadow of the Colossus is entirely in the fact that it allows us as players to create a coherent narrative in our minds based upon the signifiers and signs that exist within the game. So let's talk about, for instance, what I think Shadow of the Colossus is quote-unquote actually about. Wander is Eamon's apprentice, in my mind. I say that because Eamon seems to know him, because Wander seems to understand magical ritual. Wander isn't particularly a skilled swordsman, so he seems to be somebody who is probably undergoing some sort of path of sort of like shamanistic training or whatever, even if that's the right adjective. Wander goes on a journey to revive Mono, who is somebody who he loves, and I believe that love is unrequited. Now, do I have a strong basis for saying that love is unrequited? No, of course I don't. That's just my gut feeling. Sometimes the narratives that we construct in our minds or anything else are our gut feelings. I think it's a more effective story in my mind when I'm shaping it to have this love be unrequited. I think that Eamon sacrificed Mono because she had a quote-unquote cursed fate, and whether or not that cursed fate was actually to die and then send Wander on this quest is a whole nother can of worms that we can talk about, whether or not this game talks about weird predestination stuff or anything like that. That's just a whole nother layer of the onion that we can just sort of peel back. For me, Wander is Eamon's apprentice. Eamon sacrificed Mono. Wander loved Mono and went on a journey to bring her back. On a pure narrative level, that's what this story is about. Other people might say that Wander is reviving Mono because he was forced to be the one who sacrificed her and he feels really guilty. But I think that guilt in this case is sort of a poor motivator, at least for a story as broad as this. It can work in certain other cases. I think in this case, love is a far more universal thing that we all understand. So that's my take if you want to sit back and ask, well, Heather, what is the story of Shadow of the Colossus? On a tiny level, like the personal level, that's the story of Shadow of the Colossus. But the story of Shadow of the Colossus is a story about the desecration, of nature. It is a story about the destruction of magic. It is about putting the player in a wonderful space full of fantastical things and having them kill those things and render that magical world dead. And on a sort of metatextual level, it's sort of a commentary about game quests and sort of, oh, you want to go off and be the hero, here, kill all these monsters. It's a fundamental inversion of that text as we understand it. We go off and kill all these monsters because we want to accomplish something good, but it turns out that in the course of trying to accomplish something good, we let free what is apparently an evil god. And we have all sorts of interpretations if we want to talk about Dorman, right? But Dorman is clearly a force to be feared to some extent. Certainly Eamon and his men fear Dorman. Dorman still seems to make good on his bargain to Wander. He revives Mono. He potentially reincarnates Wander, but at the same time, we've gone on this journey where we have killed nature in service of a higher power that we do not understand, and there's partially a commentary being made about the nature of video game quests and sort of, following your objective and things like that. And I think it does it better than any of the bullshit that BioShock tries to pull on us. BioShock takes all of that and says, like, haha, this is what the story was about. Shadow of the Colossus is so fucking powerful because it doesn't need to do that. Fumito Ueda doesn't need to do what Ken Levine does. He doesn't need to sit back and go like, this is actually a story about, on a meta level at least, this is a story about the dangers of just going and playing in a video game world and like the damages that might actually be caused by going on a quest without much thought. Levine will take that and like rub your face in it like it's a lemon and it fucking burns, right? Ueda just lets you exist in the space, has these events happen, and you can figure out whatever the meta-narrative is on your own. That's what I think the meta-narrative of this game is, and that's also why I think this game is important, and it's also why games are important. Books can be metatextual. I think that games can be metatextual in a way that is fundamentally far, far stronger than books because of the interactions that occur. So I go through the game, I kill all these creatures, I have to go through the actual action of killing all these creatures, and at the end, I actually feel transformed into this dark god force because it changes my control scheme, it does all these other things. That's ludic pressure, blah, 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 blah. This game is powerful and important because it one, allows the player to create their own narrative. Two, leaves all of these symbols around for the player to make allegorical connections with. And all of those pathways are valid. We used a lot of etymology, we used some numerology, we used a lot of allegorical comparison. All of that is valid, and this game never rejects that. So on that facet, this game is incredibly powerful. 3, it has a very strong metatextual thing to sort of comment on, but it doesn't really intrude upon the player in the way that, say, I don't know, Bioshock does. And if it sounds like I'm being hard on Bioshock, it's just because Bioshock, in terms of presenting its meta-narrative commentary, is like the complete antithesis of what's happening here. 4, the game is powerful just simply on a mythic level, on an emotional level. If you want to look at this game through a romantic lens of just like the sweeping emotionality that exists within the game, it is an incredibly powerful and incredibly moving and incredibly artistic game. And I don't use the word artistic lightly. It is a game that has an artistry about it. I was recently talking about Doom in another video I made, and I commented and said that elegant design is the greatest amount of effect for the least amount of effort. And this game expends a surprisingly minimal amount of effort and gets an immensely huge amount of effect accomplished. And that's because it leaves so much in the hands of the player, because the last thing that this game does more than any other game I've encountered is that it trusts the player. The game holds out its hand to you and says, we are going on a journey. You sort of take control. It trusts the player. It doesn't think the player is going to sort of misuse whatever power they have. It trusts the player to be the god between the gaps. It trusts the player to figure out all of these things. It trusts the player to understand the significance of the mechanics, to understand the significance of the story. This is a modern day myth. It has a lot to say. It is painfully existential at times in a way that is both beautiful and incredibly haunting. It is visually dynamic in ways that other games wish they could be. It is so simple narratively, yet also so incredibly effective that it truly does achieve what I believe is elegance in game design. And that is why I think this is an important game. And that is why I sat on my butt for a week or slightly over a week and tried my best to make something even resembling a coherent critique or examination of this text. This text has so much more than what I have talked about. And I think it is important for you to experience, not just from a play perspective, but for you to sit back, you wonderful audience member, to sit back and to sort of experience a game that trusts you enough to imbue all of its space and all of its assets and all of it with meaning. And games can do that on a very amazing level that I don't know other mediums are capable of. And this is something that we have just barely tapped into in this game, and we have just barely tapped into in this art form. So I beg of you, if you have any one thing that you take away from this, and if you have listened to me for the upwards of 19 minutes or whatever I have been talking right now, understand that games are powerful things. They are powerful symbols. They are powerful stories. They are important things that can teach us lessons and let us live in magical, glorious worlds. And when we examine those worlds, we need to imbue them with meaning. And this game, Shadow of the Colossus, puts you at the forefront and says, go for it. And every game should do that. Games should not be afraid to let the player have more control over the narrative, over the ludic, over all of these things, over figuring out what the meaning of a text is. A game shouldn't need to prevent you from from thinking. It shouldn't need to put a thesis right up in your face and say, this is what's going on. Games can be so much more. And I hope that if you take away anything from what I have said throughout this entire process, it is that the power to find meaning in games and the power to find importance in art is completely in your hands. And that is the thing that Shadow of the Colossus teaches us more than anything else.